Yeah, no, I'm fine with it. So.
Dawn is fine with everything, and we're live, which is wonderful. Dawn's got the England t-shirt on because England are playing and we planned this very badly, or England played too well and they maybe should have lost one of the first round matches.
Yeah.
Welcome, Andy, Bill, and Dawn today, and welcome everybody who's out there. If you've got any questions, please do post them. The idea of this is less the traditional Kalicube Tuesdays format and more a word lift, geek out, and ask you questions and get everybody involved format. So welcome. I would assume the people watching us know who you are, but quickly, Anton's going to put the score up as it goes through, and hopefully it won't be embarrassing for Dawn. Dawn, quickly tell us who you are, what you do, and why we should love you so much.
Yeah, I'm Dawn Anderson. I've got a consultancy stroke agency SEO called Bertie, no relation to Google Bert, just a very pleasant coincidence, and based in Manchester. And yeah, no, I'm really intrigued by language models, the future of search, and a lot of the IR side of things, and just the theoretical stuff. Really.
Yeah, I cite you all the time. You're one of my favorite people and one of the most informative people who've helped me. And Bill, it's the same thing. I'm constantly citing you. You've taught me so much. Really quickly, for anybody who doesn't know you, and I would have thought that's probably going to be nobody because everybody knows you, don't they?
I'm not sure everybody knows me. My name is Bill Slawski. I write at SEO by the Sea, and I'm the director of SEO research at Go Fish Digital, which is a East Coast SEO agency that does a bit more than SEO these days. They were first known for reputation management. They've branched out into SEO. Now they're doing PPC and some other stuff that help people market their websites.
Brilliant. Head of SEO research, that has to be the dream job. Like Jono Alderson at Yoast has the dream job. Bill and Jono have got the two dream jobs in the world, I reckon. Andy, who are you? And I know you're from WordLift and we talk all the time, so you're not going to be teaching me anything new.
No, not at all. I'm looking for my dream job too. So,
but really quickly.
Yeah. So I am co-founder and CEO of WordLift, and we build knowledge graph for improving SEO.
Brilliant. I'm Jason Barnard from Kalicube Pro. I'm the brand search guy. I'm obsessed with what appears when somebody Googles your brand name or your personal name. I bore people to death with it day in, day out, and I work a lot with WordLift because they're awesome. So wonderful. Let's get on with it. We're going to be talking about MUM, KELM, and the future of search. Now, when MUM came out, my immediate reaction was how exciting and how wonderful. But I think kind of a lot of us have misunderstood what it was. What it is, rather. Who wants to explain what is MUM? Dawn.
Well, obviously, it's really early days with a lot of this stuff anyway, but I feel that it's an accumulation of, it's kind of the move towards search increasingly as a recommender system, taking all of the learnings from BERT, from transfer learning, from Google T5, from Mina, from Lambda, from everything they're doing with images, video, from the whole of the AI learnings, and ultimately over time, having it so there is this whole multitask recommender system going on that increasingly removes the need for queries. So it's that move towards queryless, utilizing a range of media, whatever is needed at the time, and that move towards journeys rather than questions. So, but it's not going to happen immediately. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, multitask unified model. I mean, when I heard that, I thought, oh, what's that? And when you read it and you understand it, actually makes total sense. As you said, it's multitasking from multiple sources, bring it all together in a unified manner into a model. And from what I understand, Bill, and you probably might correct me if I'm wrong, but the knowledge panel, the idea is that they show a knowledge panel so we don't have to go to all these different sites to find the information. It brings it all into one place to save us time. And MUM's going down that path.
It helps anticipate questions. Google has come out with stuff they call teachable moments, which are examples of queries that we might perform, like the people also ask queries. where they're learning about questions people ask from query logs, dealing with related entities or questions with query templates, where they're learning about the types of things that people ask. They're crowdsourcing this information. Mm-hmm. So we have a knowledge panel, and we expand it to look at images and other dimensions. It's sort of like Amazon's moving towards product graph, where they're asking more information about dimensions that involve selling things. So Google's moving towards a multimodal language, machine learning language, where they're looking at images and they're looking at other aspects of things that we might see. And that's supposed to cover multiple more dimensions, which is why MUM is said to be 1,000 times more powerful than knowledge graph, because it's looking at a lot more aspects of things.
Right. Okay, good. I mean, kind of the idea is that it brings it all together. I mean, Andy, you're terribly into all this with product SERPs and products in internal knowledge graphs. I mean, Google's going to get phenomenally powerful. I mean, the idea is it brings all these different sources together and presents them. Isn't that going to end up with Google just presenting us with the truth?
Well, I mean, we don't know if it's going to be the truth, but one interesting aspect is that right now the main paradigm is indexing, crawling and indexing, a web of pages. Now, the evolution of this new way of looking at search is that rather than crawling and indexing, we're moving towards creating these large language models that know things and are able to provide expert advice and nuanced answers. So in a way, a knowledge panel right now, it's just factoids. So just data that tells you things about the people and the products and the companies. But here we're going into a conversational experience or a queryless experience, which is completely different. And it's different the way in which the information is gathered into Google, because it's going to be a language model and not an index. And then, of course, yes, we do expect a combination of both, but that's a paradigm shift. And maybe Dawn can explain what a language model is, because I'm sure that she can do a much better job than me.
Well, to add to that, one thing I would say is that, the language model really is, it fills in all the gaps between the structured data, the schema, because ultimately, I think the original plan years and years back was to have this web of data in the first place. But unfortunately, the web of data had a lot of gaps, and that's just words and free text and all the content that everybody made increasingly as CMSs were developed, and everybody's a publisher now, and some of it is just pretty rubbish content, isn't it, out there? So I think a language model is, ultimately, it's a representation of context learned on something like, originally it was Wikipedia, of course, but that's not very natural, because it's very structured Wikipedia. So I think T5, for instance, that used the common crawl is a lot more like a normal language that we use in the web and in the world, because that's based on petabytes of legacy archives from the web, cleaned, and obviously things like the swear words have been removed and so forth. But it's hugely bigger, more powerful, and more natural, and more naturally linked as well, because Wikipedia has these quite abnormal linking structures, doesn't it? It's not a representation of how you would normally connect pages, because it's just so well connected, Wikipedia. It's so organized, isn't it? So, yeah.
Right. And kind of all of the machines, including Google, have been training their machines on Wikipedia, which means they've got a slightly kind of skewed view of the world. And something like T5 has a lot of, I would assume, junk in it.
A lot of it's cleaned in T5 because it's based on C4. So the model they use, the model's T5, and actually that model T5, and I see you've done some stuff with that, Andy, as well, in your models that you've been building, etc.
Yep.
But T5 is like BERT on steroids, if you like. Yeah, it's much bigger. BERT was really just a starting point. It's obviously like the equivalent of getting WordPress, a vanilla WordPress, and then building a better site on it. So T5 is a big leap forward in terms of training, but it uses a thing called C4, which is a clean crawled colossal clean crawled corpus. Yeah. Yep. So ultimately, it has the common crawl, and it has all the swear words, all the like JavaScript code, etc., white space, and that kind of thing, and it's literally trained on that. It learns the language of the world on C4, which is this huge part of the crawl. So much more natural than the original BERT, which was just the English Wikipedia, which in itself represents a bias, the fact that it's the English Wikipedia, So
right, because a lot of us are kind of still stuck in this idea that Google has just trained itself on Wikipedia and that's the end of it. But BERT was the beginning. That was what, a year ago, and now it's kind of letting loose into uncharted territories of unstructured data of the rubbish web that we've built over the last 22 years that doesn't necessarily fit together very well. That's a phenomenal task.
But it's going to be training on questions and answers as well. It's like MS Marco is literally a question and answer data set. People also ask. It's just transfer learning, continually like learning on those questions and answers and understanding what fits together and in what order, really.
Right, and the people also ask. I mean, sorry, we're seeing people also ask is kind of building and building and building. There was another kind of uptick a month and a half ago. I mean, Bill, all these questions and answers you were talking about, kind of the teachable moments. Google's obsessed by that, and that's exactly where it's going.
Right. 2013, they came out with a paper called Wikipedia, which talked about using query logs to build a ontology of web questions and answers, and talked about canonical queries. So there's a certain format that they're used to seeing queries in from searchers. They've crowdsourced this information from people who search the web. A few million people a day tell you how people do things.
Yeah.
And they try to serve the web the way they want to see it. Deep Web, a couple of years ago, the AI company Google bought, published a paper where they're talking about extracting information from CNN and the Daily Mail. And they chose those because of the format they published things in. It was not their first choice, not their first decision, but they said these were the sites that it was easiest to extract information from for us. And that's why perhaps Wikipedia tends to be popular with Google at this point in time, because it's easier to extract information from them. Subjects or the titles of pages.
Yeah,
word of those pages.
And then you also have things like IMDb and Music Brains and Rotten Tomatoes, which are all kind of pushing this structured kind of content because it's all formatted in the same way. Fan sites, which is why we see so many knowledge panels and information about stars. It isn't necessarily because there's so much information about them. As a musician, that's how I got into the knowledge graph, was simply because the data about me was structured.
But we do see Google moving away from knowledge bases in some of the patents. There's one on searching quotes where they said early, the first version of the patent, we'll search for those quotes in knowledge bases. And then they did a continuation patent where they said they updated the claims in the patent, and they said we'll search audio on the web and find the quotes in audio. We'll show people videos, because when people search for a quote, they usually know who said it and they know why the person said it. They want to show people saying that quote. And if we can give them a URL for the video, they can show people, they can share it.
And then there's also, sorry, Bill. I was going to say there's also data set search as well now. They have increasing amounts and sources of semi-trustworthy to trustworthy. I should imagine they'll have like degrees of trustworthiness for databases, so that there's more and more data that they can rely on to fill in those gaps in natural language now in queries.
Right. We had Luna Don talking about trustworthiness of web sources, and She came up with a metric for that, which Google didn't adopt, but they're sort of looking at that with Knowledge Panel at Amazon, where she's at now. There's a multimodal model that Google's talking about also, which anticipates using video and audio at some point in time. They say that's one of their goals for it. That's why it's years away.
Right, and one of the problems with that is the cost. I mean, the financial cost, Andy, of actually analysing all that video and all that audio. We're a way away from that, are we not?
Not really.
Oh, right, okay, my goof. Off you go.
No, I think that, I mean, cost optimization strategies, you know, are coming up, and you know, the idea in general of a multimodal search engine is that you have these you know, vector space for the different mediums. So one vector space for the text and one vector space for video. Then they are converged into one single vector for the document that kind of represent the thing behind, you know, these two medium. And so in the end, vectors are not too hard to be stored because these are just, you know, numbers. So you don't need to get the video. You just need to extract from the video the vectors, and then you store the vectors. So, I mean, I think the interesting part here is that, as we were saying, every language model comes with its own data set, you know, like, you know, a GPT Neo or GPT J are built on a data set called the Pile. And T5 has been built on a data set called C4. So a lot of the innovation and natural language generation is really about the data set that it's collected, which no longer is, you know, just Wikipedia or just Wikipedia in English, but it's a variety of sources that in the end, it's becoming the web because the next language model will have, you know, enough data to be comparable to the index that Google has today. Ooh. And that's I think that.
I was going to say there's also, I think it's called Deep Set now, where I don't know whether you saw, they're talking about, instead of having like the multi-stage ranking system that they have now, which is, to all intents and purposes, is not that accurate in the first sweep through. There's quite a move now utilizing contextual models overlaying the index, yeah, so that in actual fact the first pass of an index or indexing is a lot more like accurate, if that makes sense. And those papers are being presented at SIGIR, I think, in July, so really soon. And some are already being implemented into search engines. Now, probably not Google, but I know that, for instance, the passage indexing very much looked similar to like DeepCT, which I know the Dai, who is now at Google, part of the natural language processing team, research team, she created that. So I feel that with passage indexing, once that starts to roll out more and more and more, that contextual overlay, because of the challenges that transformers have with efficiency, that contextual overlay will be implemented, but almost in a kind of divide and conquer approach to algorithms, which are kind of big in search. They seem to implement a lot utilizing divide and conquer, i.e. if the problem's too big, chop it up and make it small, which is kind of what passages are. So yep. I feel like that's almost like a lead-in to getting a more contextual search with better understanding of language models, and then, as you say, overlaying the likes of knowledge graphs as well.
Right, and one part of MUM, sorry, did move on to the idea that it's language agnostic. To what extent is that true? I mean, they said they've trained it across 75 different languages. I mean, the idea of a language agnosticity, if that's a thing, is that something realistic, or is it still a long way away?
No, I would say it's quite near. I mean, look at Facebook.
I think there are already a lot of implementation that are language agnostic. So I mean, that doesn't really, I mean, transformer based architecture are have been designed originally for translation problems. So there's always been a lot of effort in kind of moving from one language to another. And right now, the semantic space can be compared between one language and another, in a quite simple way. So it doesn't, that doesn't sound to be as innovative as, probably the ability to scale up the numbers of content to an entire index of the web. That seems to be very innovative. That seems to be kind of, a giant leap, using not a language model like today we have based on, these highly curated or not so curated data set, but the index of the web. That's really breakthrough.
But then you've got, Don, you were saying T5 has been terribly cleaned up. Once you give it the entire web, isn't that going to throw it into, there is a big danger that it's going to get a lot of things wrong. And we had an example of the wrong photo being attached to somebody who was a Bulgarian serial killer. Isn't that kind of thing going to get more and more common?
That is different to me. That's a different thing. That's
right.
That's misunderstanding where data has come from, not where the language model is from. So you see that quite a lot. I did a talk a few years ago in Amsterdam about, I can't even remember what the name of it was, disambiguation. When you're relying on data from several different sources, you could easily pull in, like, this is where name density determination, for instance, can become a challenge, because you have lots of different mentions of different things being curated together. So that's data being pulled from many sources, and there's a misalignment between which, that equiprobability is imbalanced between which is the correct one. So that to me is a different thing than the language model. The language model is just training on context, continually training on contextual glue of words together. Yeah. So, but just to that point on internationalization, obviously we know that the original BERT had this monolinguistic to multilinguistic ability, just because, for instance, there's quite a lot of linguistic crossover between just language anyway. They do say, if you learn Spanish, you'll probably be able to learn Italian easily, and because a lot of it comes from Latin, as we know. But since then, a lot of specific language models have been built. There's that BERT Langstreet now, which is a curation of language-specific BERT models. And from that, the likes of Facebook have now built models that actually translate from Chinese to French without having to go through English first. Because I think that's been one of the big challenges. A lot of the time, particularly for the Asian, the non-UTF-8 or whatever languages, they've had to go through English and then translate it back out again. Yeah. Now, being able to just translate from one language to the other without English bias, if you like, that's quite a big deal. And Facebook, I believe, have done that. So, yeah, language is a massive deal, because I think they're really keen to get beyond the bias of it. Program is English and the English of English being everywhere, because it's just not fair, really, is it, ultimately?
No. Well, I used to say, remember that Google's native language is English, which has always been this kind of struggle that they've had. And as you say, if we can move away from that, it'd be wonderful. In MUM, they're talking about if there's something in Japanese about Mount Fuji, they can potentially bring that in as a piece of information to supplement whatever it is they've got in English. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a different character set. That's the challenge as well, isn't it? Yeah. So to be able to go, and if you remember, I was reading something the other day that just talked about how literally when Google tends to do international rollouts, tends to do the Asian countries last, because they are harder character sets to do things with. They really are. They're not written in the same characters, are they?
No, well, I've got my wee database at Kalicube, and I've given up on anything that isn't Latin-based characters, because it just throws everything out. Andy, have you got any experience with the Asian characters or non-Latin?
WordLive does support non-Latin characters. We do have support for Chinese, Japanese. Luckily, I cannot read it, so I think it's good. But we have a few clients. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard and unique. But it is true that right now, you can use a language model like GPT-3 or GPT-Neo, and you can ask, translate these from one language to another, and it works pretty good because it's been trained on multiple language. So that's really fascinating.
Brilliant. Now, can we just take a little stop there and now talk about KELM, because we're talking about MUM and KELM. What is KELM? Anybody?
I asked Bill.
Bill, what's KELM, please?
Okay, knowledge panel like Wikipedia is based on tuples, and Wikipedia is primarily based on triples. Subject, verb, object. Albert Einstein invented. They have a person, place, or thing, and some relationship. Wikipedia is knowledge means relationship, and Google patents about the knowledge graph. They'll insist that over and over again. It's a way of understanding how entities and classes and types are related to each other in the knowledge graph. So there's structurally it is based on tuples, and they said if we can present that in more of a natural language, we can use that for language models better. Right. So they're talking about using some type of knowledge graph to text translation to try to present that a little bit differently, to flesh it out a little bit more, and to make the transition a little bit easier for these language models they're using. And
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. Do you have a question?
No, I the idea that basically said, well, we've used Wikipedia to understand the world, and now we're taking Wikipedia with the facts we've learnt, and we're now throwing it back at the world, presented in a different way, written by machines from our understanding of the facts that we initially got. And they say they've converted the Wikidata knowledge graph into a synthetic natural sentences with 18 million sentences, 45 million triples. Something nuts like that. Sorry.
The goal of something like this is that when you have a training set of that size that has the ability to teach a language model, how to move from factual data to sentences, then you can train, language model on a vast amount of information. I've done the same work on a very small data set from DBpedia triples using T5. And now I'm planning to redo the same work and retrain T5 using KELM, and because that's exactly the point of a data set like this. It will also allow you to control biases, because every time that a language model will say something, you can use KELM to check if, the validity of what the sentences, what you're saying with your language model. And that's exactly what is missing. OpenAI has done a similar exercise recently with something called Palm that allows GPT-3 to be retrained and to become less toxic. So KELM is a beautiful counterpart of language models that allows you to, make sure that you are saying something that is true, and make sure that you're saying something that it's recognized as valid and potentially unbiased.
So, KELM is actually just a data set. It's
almost like an evaluation tool, isn't it? It's like, you train a model, and obviously then you can do part of your evaluation utilizing something like KELM to check that toxicity and accuracy, expert accuracy, is in place, I suppose, really, isn't it? Is that right?
Yep, it is also a method for creating that data set. So there is also, the technology that has created the data set, which is also innovative in a way. But the true point being that we need these data set in order to control the language model and to train the language model to say something that we'll believe it's true and we'll believe it's correct and fair. And that's a big issue because, of course, a language model can say anything that, as long as he has read something about it, so many times that he can repeat it.
Right. And basically, kind of from that perspective, the idea of the toxicity is one thing that most people are worried about, is that there is a danger if you let the machines loose on all this, they will come up with the famous example of Microsoft's Twitter bot becoming terribly right-wing, sexist, fascist, and everything else. And the idea that does this relieve that what was the fear is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big solution to that problem because you can run another network on top of it that kind of counter-checks the facts and say, yes, this can be said, this cannot be said. And so, yeah, and then you can retrain it. So it's super important.
Right, and so now we've done half an hour talking through KELM and MUM, and then kind of the big chunk is, what does all this mean to the future of our industry? I mean, SEO, from what you were saying earlier on, Dawn, is a bit of a misnomer more and more because it's providing solutions. It's solutions at optimization. Search engine optimization no longer makes sense as an acronym.
No, I think the SEO is going to be around for a long time to come. I think that the more you, in a way, almost the more you add these things on, the more complex SEO becomes. So the more problems you kind of create, the more ways people can get it wrong. And I don't think we'll be going anywhere quickly, in terms of we'll still have jobs. It's just increasingly complex, and increasingly, for me, it's a positive thing. It's an increasingly challenging field where we have to continually up our game, move away from tactics, become more strategists, understand the whole user journeys more. Sorry, Pomeranian barking. I'm going to pass over to somebody else a second. But no, for me, I think it will become more about journeys, but it'll become more about us predicting and understanding our audience and changes in the audience and providing information to meet those needs still in content or whatever at the right time. So I think we'll always have work.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean we wouldn't have work. I meant search engines is not necessarily the right way to describe them today. I mean, there is, you said assistive engines a couple of years ago when I said answer engines. It's assistive. It's bringing us down the path to what it believes we're looking for. Google Discover pushing this stuff towards. I mean, you're looking at Google Discover. We're not going to end up with a situation where Google's just pushing its own understood facts to us, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're safe in terms of jobs first, but I think what is happening is that we need to start looking more at complex user intents, right? Because as the machine becomes more capable of understanding the actual need, it's not just about creating a web page. It probably will take more to create a meaningful experience that can be, used by an AI for answering, a complex user need. So that's kind of the way I see it. So it's kind of an evolution from just publishing, the web pages as we do now to publishing web pages and then data that can be used for kind of validating and combining and matching. And one important aspect is also the media part. Why now we have this emphasis on video object markup. I mean, I shared the other day kind of a spike when we started to publish 200 videos, and we got a lot of clicks and a lot of impressions out of publishing videos. Why is Google rewarding so much media? And I think that reason is that it gets important now for Google to understand media and text all together. And so the more we help creating these kind of multimodal experience, the more we increase, the ability to get on the top.
Right. I mean, Google's becoming a multimedia engine, or is terribly keen on the multimedia idea. I mean, I've had the same experience with video. Is it does reward me an awful lot and makes me want to make more video.
Do you know Susan DeMay? I always remember Susan DeMay. She was interviewed not long ago, and she's, you know who she is, don't you, Bill? And she's been with Microsoft, for years. Very, very revered. And she had a wonderful interview, and she said, I've spent many, many years thinking about search. She said, nobody gets up in the morning thinking, I'm going to search today. She said, they get up with jobs to do. And our job is to help them complete those jobs. So that is a move to like Google almost and search engines as a task-driven search increasingly. So that's the direction. I think we have to be there at every turn. We almost have to provide an immersive experience in the content we provide now. It's not good enough to have some blog post or whatever. You have to like have every single different way that query could be interpreted within a certain vertical, if that makes sense.
For a long time, Susan Dumas was writing about refinding things and helping people find things they already found on the web. And that seemed to be a common theme at Microsoft, something they focus on a lot, getting over that task, finding things. And Google echoed that in talking about navigability, finding things that people already found that they knew existed, but they weren't sure what the address was. Because we had Disney buying places like ESPN, which was espn.goto.com for a long time. You had to search for ESPN to find it, to get the URL right.
So an awful lot of navigation. I mean, but that brings us to kind of the holistic view of SEO, which is, it's now part of marketing in the sense that if you can reach out to somebody and get them involved with what you're talking about, they will then end up searching on Google to find it. So SEO as a standalone is no longer valid?
SEO's evolving. SEO's just about really just digging in and trying to interpret intent more and more, and trying to predict in advance what that user's going to need. I don't know. SEO in a spam sense, I think, for me, is kind of always been, that's not SEO. That's just spam. No offense.
As you read these papers that talk about more advanced topics, they go back to some of the beginning stuff, like inverted indexes and words on inverted indexes as a mainstay, start to SEO and a way to help people find things, understanding what words on what pages. Google enhanced that with a phrase-based posting list, where they told you what phrases appear on which pages. And instead of just adding LSI keywords to pages, you add phrases that actually mean something, that Google has already indexed. They know what they exist. They came out with context vectors, where they said some words have multiple meanings. And if you put context terms on those pages, we've taken from knowledge bases, say there's 3 different meanings for the word horse. There's the equestrian horse, which is an animal. There's the sawhorse, which is a carpenter's version of a horse. It's a tool. There's a vault, which is a gymnast version of a horse, which is an exercise implement. And for the page about equestrians, you include terms like saddle and stirrups and thoroughbreds. You mean a horse. You've actually focused more on the meaning on that page. And as an SEO, you've done more work, but you've made it clearer to the search engine what's correct, what's proper. So SEO may mean SEOs have to do more work, but if we do the work, we're going to get better results.
Right. Sorry, Dawn, you were saying something?
I was going to say, I think especially in that last leg, the top 10 results in competitive verticals, I think disambiguation is kind of much more relevant there, because if we take the notion of mean reciprocal rank, you have to effectively be twice as relevant as the next result, or because it goes like 1, 2, a third, quarter, blah blah blah, etc. Because of Zipfian distribution. So you have to like be completely granular and make sure that you aren't ambiguous in any way whatsoever with an intent alignment in that top 10 or top 20, because it doesn't really matter in the top 50 results. If you're 50, 60, whatever, nobody's looking at the 50s and 60s. It's that top 10 where, for me, the real eye for detail in SEO is, and the potential for ambiguity is increasingly important. You know,
and that happens with people's names. Like Michael Jackson was the king of pop. Michael Jackson was the head of Homeland Security in the United States.
yeah,
And if you're writing about Michael Jackson, you make sure you show people what the right Michael Jackson was. Otherwise, you mislead them a lot.
Well, one thing that I noticed recently is that, yeah, totally agree that ambiguity is still a very kind of edge, you know, that we can use for going up, but it's becoming less important in some areas. Like, for instance, a few years ago, you know, local places in, let's say, in Italy or in Austria, I would see the difference of, you know, adding a connection with geonames. Right now, I see it a lot less because Google has become a lot more capable of disambiguating locations. Of course, with people, then it's a completely different game, and we know that, you know, how complex it can be to kind of understand, you know, who are you talking to. But with places, a few years ago, it would really be a game changer to use, you know, proper same as that would help Google understand if this was this locality or this other. But right now, it's becoming less relevant. And that's I think of a sign of, you know, how we should move forward and kind of get more specific and try to see, okay, what is really the intent that I'm serving? What is really the, you know, the type of disambiguation that I want to bring here? How is this different from that?
Right, and it's increasingly saying I need to actually serve or aim for the audience who are relevant for me in Google. I mean, I'm kind of starting to look at Google and think, well, Google's got a product, and its product is the SERP. And one question we need to start asking ourselves, if I want to be shown on Google as the recommended solution, I need to create the content that fits into Google's product.
Right.
Which, from your example, Don, you were talking about the top 10. I mean, one way to jump the queue is to create the video you were talking about, Andy, and get in the video boxes, which means you don't need to rank for the top 10. You get your video straight in there.
For me, in the top 10, you have to keep providing additional value that's not already there.
Right.
No, it's not good enough to just copy somebody else, you know. It's not good enough. You have to add something more, something which is another potential way that intent could be met. Because particularly on the very, very broad queries, what does it mean? You have to just try and meet as many of those intents as possible. If you want to get, if you want to be others, there's no point just copying, you know. So
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, and so kind of a video
and a video
in a
would add some value, but I would add the video personally in the page as well as the content.
Sure.
Working about.
Yeah, and I mean, if a video can serve the user's intent as well as, if not better than, the textual result, then, I mean, triggering a video box is something I've seen on brand search, particularly an awful lot, is if videos are relevant and helpful to the audience who are searching your brand name or your personal name, you will get the video boxes. And if it's never going to be relevant, you can create as many videos as you want, you will never get one. And it is that kind of serving the intent in a way that is actually useful and valuable to the user. And Google is the machine that it's not a machine, it is a machine that's evaluating what is going to be relevant and helpful within the context of its own product for its users.
Yeah.
Ooh, jolly good. Oh, I like that. Right, so we've got 15 minutes left. Dawn, you've got something to say. I can see it.
I was going to say, though, at that really broad level of query where it doesn't know, you have to try and meet as many as you can, though. You know what I mean? It's like with a with a single, that for me is where a great category page with everything like videos, like whatever, in e-commerce, for instance, for me, it would if the intent is not clear, if it's not clear transactional intent, that's where a great, amazing category page comes in. So yeah, that's where for me a video would sit as well as text and imagery and everything, you know.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and with ambiguous terms, Nathan Chalmers from Bing was saying that if it's ambiguous, we will tend to lengthen the SERP. The average might be 10 results, but in fact, for an ambiguous query, you'll find it's much longer. And for an unambiguous query, you'll find it will be shorter.
Yeah. Sometimes it's not that the word's ambiguous. Sometimes the intent is ambiguous as well. Do you know what I mean? It's like broad queries. I see often that Google are asked and backed a lot about, oh, you've got all these like people clicking around on your results, but it tends to be on the really big broad queries where the intent is like, what do you mean by a single word? You know, what does a user mean? It's relying on that user feedback actually, and that becomes through what Bill mentioned, certain query refinement. You know, as the user clicks around, they're providing information to feedback and get further results.
So what is a canonical query? When Google is asked a question like, how long is Harry Potter? They mean Harry Potter the movie, or they mean the podcast, or they mean the book, or they mean how tall is it? You're not quite sure from the query itself what the answer people expect to see. And I've done some of the searches in Google to see how they respond to ambiguous queries, and sometimes they don't know. Sometimes they're just guessing. And perhaps they're doing that to some degree based upon what they show other people and what responses they get to those, whether or not people might click on something they respond with.
Yeah. There's a great book, actually, Bill, that I read quite a lot. It's literally called Search Result Diversification. It's an academic book, and it literally talks about how when they're not sure, they put like clusters of 2 or 3 of different types of result to meet different intents. And you can see it in the SERPs, actually. When you look, if it's a big, broad query, you'll see some transactional, some informational, some navigational, just quite a range of different offerings to say, hey, this is what we've got, which do you want? And then the refinement.
Which brings us to the, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, and sometimes Google shows cues where they're asking for more information. Are they writing something? Did you misspell that? Did you mean this?
Yeah.
And Bing had the lozenges, but I mean, one thing I think is important when I talk to people about is when you've got one of those ambiguous queries and they've got those clusters of different types of responses, you're not aiming for one of the top 10 or whatever it might be. You're aiming for one of the 3 spots that are in that top 10. So it's a false idea if you've got a very ambiguous query and you're aiming to rank. If your page is navigational, you're aiming for one of the 3 navigational spots. If it's transactional, you're aiming for one of the 3 transactional spots. And I found that to be a really useful way to explain to clients you're not actually aiming for one of the 10, you're aiming for one of the 3 within the 10.
Or maybe you just got the wrong query to target.
Yeah. Very good point.
And one thing I would add as well is, one thing I see, which is really, really problematic, is a lot of the time, the bigger...
That's Bert.
One thing I see is a lot of the time, increasingly, as people pile more and more content into websites now, is people end up becoming competitors of themselves too often. Yeah. So in actual fact, they almost like divide their relevance because they have many pages that fit within the same query cluster, but they're all from them. So I see that a lot increasingly. People are
what do you recommend? What can someone do when they have a lot of content that goes on similar topics? Because there's a lot of people that have these issues. What would you recommend?
I think I would try and I think internal linking is a really good cue. I would try and add as many canonical signals with intent built in, like anchors and, and trying to just build like really strong, not just single pages, but hubs around a topic. The topical hubs are like a classic way to like build co-occurrence around that, like not just a page, but a section. The section is intent by section almost,
And I identify the intent in your titles and meta descriptions.
Yeah.
So that it makes it easier for a searcher to identify which is the right page for them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I have another questions.
Yeah.
Now I'm having fun. So how do we optimize for a language model? What do we do? Because right now, if I go like in GPT-3 and I ask to talk about, let's say, a brand that could be SEMrush or, whatever, McDonald's, I do get, something coming out of that, which, can be biased, but I can see the power of that because I can imagine, how many applications are going to provide similar sentences around, let's say, a brand or a person. What can we do in order to get these, language model to get the right content out?
So I usually start with identifying who the audiences are for a site. With different products and different services, you usually have more than one audience. You usually have a mix, and you're going to have different words that attract different audience members. So understand who you're writing for, and then develop around that. Develop around what problems they have, what issues they might want to see resolved, what specific things that interest them about what you're selling. Break it down into that stuff. Give people the answers they want to see, and they're more likely to respond to that as if it were a conversation. Which is interesting because when Google first started talking about MUM, they started talking about this as a conversation with an expert.
Right. Sorry.
I think that holds true with language models and with optimizing for them.
Right. Oh, I've been having fun with Kalicube. I've developed a little module that you write your description. I mean, it's for entities. It's for people and companies rather than kind of general search for products and buying things. But and we ping Google's NLP and see what it returns in terms of its understanding of the categorization and the sentence structure it throws back and the entities it's recognized either explicitly or guessed from the context of the text. And I found it incredibly interesting to see how sensitive it can be. You can change, capitalization is one of those things you kind of think, yeah, whatever. But in fact, capitalization is proper nouns when it's within a sentence. And Google takes that incredibly seriously. And it also takes incredibly serious what's at the top, what's first is much more important than what's at the bottom. And when I say it, it just sounds so obvious. But all of these grammatical rules and creative writing courses I took at primary school are suddenly coming into their own. And it's great stuff. I love it. Oh, Dawn, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I had to mute because there was literally a dog fight in the hallway. Thank God. Like guest dog as well was having a fight, not even my dog. I was going to say, so as well, I think it's going to be a really exciting time for these interpretation of language models because dialogue, spoken dialogue is coming into the fray now. When you look at the Glue leaderboard, that literally is Mina, Google's conversational chatbots, that's kind of we've not really heard a lot about that, but it's been doing amazing things, primarily in India, and T5, Google Brain Team, have taken that and literally they're leading the Glue leaderboard with a combination, a hybrid model of T5 and Mina. And then when you look at Lambda, because we've not really come on to that yet, have we?
Yep.
The conversational bot that they were talking about, that has been trained off Mina, the dialogue. So for me, that is almost one of the first actual combination of language, written, and dialogue, spoken dialogue. Because we know, for instance, BERT is is built into Dialogflow. So it's kind of reaching those further directions now, chatbots as well as entities and images and language models and so forth. So exciting times.
Yeah, and I mean, my sister knew somebody, I can't remember what the connection was, but they were employed full-time by Amazon to analyze it. She was a linguist who was analyzing what the pauses and the ums and ahs meant, because apparently within language, an and an ah can have actually quite a lot of meaning, and trying to interpret that meaning and try and build that into the understanding of what's being said.
Google refers to that as prosody. And they talk about the meanings of pauses in speech and the extra bits of language. There's another patent from Google on accents, and how they might personalize search results based upon the accent of the people speaking. If you're speaking a certain language with an accent with another language, it means that you may have some relationship to that other language, and they may show more search results that deal with that other language, which I thought was an interesting way of taking something that some people might perceive as noise and getting value out of it.
Right. Because I mean, the thing about text is obviously it's all written down, but the voice and video as well, I mean, what you were saying earlier on, it brings in entirely new dimensions. And I interviewed, I've forgotten his name, which is terribly shameful of me, about subtitling videos and the fact that subtitles are necessary, including not stage directions, what would they be called? Explanations of the circumstances, soft music playing and that kind of thing. Incredibly helpful to Google and to users as well.
Well, they're adding further markup, aren't they? I can't remember what it's called, and the new type of markup.
The seek and search, I think, something like that. So they access the video content, and then they can, if they get the file, then they can index, the video and try to understand the cues inside the video.
Key moments, or machine learning on key moments. So,
yep.
Which again is just another. I mean, when you start to add all of these together, Dialogflow, language, spoken language, because we know spoken language is hard. I always use the example of 4 candles and 4 candles. Like, it's a great example because when it's FORK and FOUR in writing, you can tell the difference. But when you start to bring in homonyms, it becomes really challenging. But now you've got like images, videos with key moments to understand the important bits, passage indexing, language models, natural language models, structured data, schema, knowledge graphs, web of data, and all of these things together. It's big stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's becoming more and more kind of precise and granular, and the idea as users, I mean, as a Google user, I'm terribly happy when Google sends me right to the right place in the Learn to Play Blues guitar video where the guy does the super lick that I'm looking for, but still can't play.
It helps to look at a range of sources. I've looked up key moments in patents and haven't found any information, but I looked up key moments in Google support pages, and I have found things about YouTube and how they talk about key moments. So sometimes the information is there, it's just not where you first look.
Right, and the key moments are those blue things that they put in the main results. If you do timestamps, you can force them, but if you don't, it looks for the peaks in drop-offs and peaks in people rewatching, and manages to calculate those key moments. And as I said, kind of like from a user perspective, we're terribly keen on that, but from a marketing perspective, we're kind of annoyed because we don't get all of that content shown to the user. But maybe one of the solutions is to say, well, I need to make sure that if that person does turn up at exactly the right place in my blues lick video, that my brand is seen and that the user is just going to see this.
Yeah, I think when a content is split into multiple parts, as a marketer, we're always happy because there is one more angle that we can feel.
Good point. Good point. I Oh, thanks for the sun. Got to bounce for a meeting, and Dawn's got to go and watch England. Maybe win, maybe lose, maybe draw. So that's actually a delightful place to end it, because we've got people bouncing off for meetings. So thank you, everybody. And it's still 0-0. So Dawn, you have missed nothing. Thank you, Anton, for doing the technical stuff and showing us the scores and putting up everybody. Thank you, all the people who are watching. Thank you, Dawn. That was absolutely awesome. Bill, Andy, and...
Thanks, Jason.
Oh, and thanks to me.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Anton, as well.
1 hour on the dot. Thank you.
Yeah. Well done. Yeah. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Yeah.
Ciao.
Come on, England.